Hello everybody, welcome back to History of Briggs. My name is Briggs, and today we'll be talking about how the Ohio and Michigan rivalry began, the Toledo War. One witness wrote, "We are driven from our homes for acting under the authority of Ohio. Our houses broken upon in the dead of night. Citizens taken prisoner, bound hand and foot, and tied to fiery horses. Gagged that they may not alarm the rest of the citizens. The females, too, in the same house are treated with violence by being held and prevented from going to alarm the neighbors, and all this for saying to an individual he need not obey the laws of Michigan." After the assault of April 8th, 200 or 300 Michigan horsemen armed with guns and bayonets moved into the city and dishonored the Ohio flag by dragging it through the streets of Toledo on the tail of a horse. And Benjamin F. Stickney wrote soon after the outrage, "There cannot be a doubt that the generous Ohioans will turn out in mass to protect their northern border and restrain the savage barbarity of hordes to the north." And that's insane how the conflict just starts escalating now. And the outbreak of hostilities forced the Ohio office holders elected on the 6th to make a fast retreat. Likewise, the Ohio line runners, who were unarmed and unprotected. After the election, Lucas believed that the commissioners' actions had aggravated the situation and once again sent out surveyors to mark the Harris Line. The project proceeded without serious incident until April 26, 1835, when the surveying group was attacked by 50 to 60 members of General Brown's militia in the Battle of Phillips Corners, as the only site of armed conflict in the war. Surveyors wrote to Lucas afterward that while observing, as they call it, the blessings of the Sabbath, Michigan militia forces advised them to retreat. In the ensuing chase, 9 of our men, quote, 9 of our men who did not leave the ground in time after being fired upon by the enemy, from 30 to 50 shots were taken. Prisoners and carried away to Tecumseh, Michigan. End quote. While the details of the attack are disputed, Michigan claimed it fired no shots, only discharging a few musket rounds in the air. As the Ohio group retreated, the battle further infuriated, and the Ohioans and Michiganders and brought those two sides to the brink of all-out war. In response to allegations that Michigan's militia fired upon Ohioans, Lucas called a special session of Ohio's legislature on June 8th to pass several more controversial acts, including the establishment of Toledo as the county seat of Lucas County, the establishment of a court of common pleas in the city, and a law to prevent the forcible abduction of Ohio citizens from the area, and a budget of $300,000, which in today's money is $9.6 million, to implement the legislation. Michigan's territorial legislature responded with a budget of $315,000 to fund its militia. And in May and June, Michigan drafted a state constitution with provisions for a bicameral legislature, a Supreme Court, and other components of a functional state government. Congress was still not willing to allow Michigan's entry into the Union, and Jackson vowed to reject Michigan's statehood until the border issue and war were resolved. Lucas ordered his Adjutant General Samuel C. Andrews to conduct a count of the militia and was told that 10,000 volunteers were ready to fight. And that news became exaggerated as it traveled north, and soon thereafter the Michigan Territorial Press dared the Ohio Million to enter the strip, as they said, welcomed them to hospitable graves. In June 1835, Lucas dispatched a delegation consisting of U.S. Attorney Noah Haynes Swain and former Congressman William Allen and David T. Disney to Washington, D.C. to confer with Jackson. The delegation presented Ohio's case and urged Jackson to address the situation swiftly. Throughout mid-1835, both governments continued their practice of one-upmanship, and constant skirmishes and arrests occurred. Citizens of Monroe County joined in a posse to make arrests in Toledo, and partisans from Ohio, angered by the harassment, targeted the offenders of criminal prosecutions. Lawsuits were rampant, and partisans of both sides organized spying parties to keep track of the sheriffs of Wood County, Ohio, and Monroe County, Michigan, who were entrusted with the security of the border. Fighting broke out on the border, and the deputy sheriff of Monroe County, Joseph Wood, was commissioned to arrest Tu Stickney. Tu Stickney. His first name is Tu, and his last name is Stickney, who was also the son of the previously talked about Major Benjamin Stickney, and he was the younger brother of one Stickney. And so, Tu Stickney, for who these are these two men real names, for allegedly having resisted two Michigan officers by force. Tu Stickney notified Wood that the day he set foot in Toledo, his life would be in danger. The deputy sheriff attempted to carry out his commission. Stickney stabbed him in the left side with a penknife, and Wood was taken to the nearest inn for treatment and subsequently recovered. Meanwhile, 50 to 75 leading Toledo citizens, including Goodson McKay, former guest of Major Benjamin Stickney, gathered to pledge resistance against any further Michigan arrest as long as they had a drop of blood left, as they said. And this was the only blood drawn during the war, too. And upon being informed of these developments, Mason immediately ordered the Monroe posse of about 200 men into Toledo to arrest Tu Stickney. When the Toledoans sighted the armed force, a large number fled across the Maumee River, some paddling away across the river on logs, and once safely out of the posse's reach, they gave vent to their anger by firing on the intruders. In the midst of the uproar, Tu Stickney escaped, and the posse arrested 3 or 4 Ohio sympathizers, including McKay and Major Stickney. The major, on the way to the Monroe jail, was forcibly held on a horse by having his legs tied under the animal's body. When Lucas refused Mason's demand to extradite Tu Stickney to Michigan for trial, Mason wrote to Jackson for help, suggesting that the matter he referred to the U.S. Supreme Court at the time, although at the time of the conflict it was not established that the Supreme Court could resolve state boundary disputes, and Jackson declined the request. And looking for peace, Jackson began making his own efforts to end the conflict. Again, through federal investigation via Ohio's congressional delegation, in August of 1835, at the strong at the strong urging of Ohio's members of Congress, Jackson removed Mason as Michigan's territorial governor and appointed Little John S. Horner as governor. Before his replacement arrived, Mason ordered 1,000 Michigan militiamen to enter Toledo and prevent this symbolically important first session of the Ohio Court of Common Pleas. While the idea was popular with Michigan residents, the effort failed. The judges held a midnight court before quickly retreating south of the Maumee River, where Ohio forces were positioned. And Horner proved extremely unpopular as governor, and his tenure was very short. And residents disliked him so much they burned him in effigy and pelted him with vegetables upon his entry into the territorial capital, which at the time was Detroit. And in October 1835, elections during the October 1835 elections, voters approved the draft constitution and re-elected Mason as governor. The same election saw Isaac E. Crary chosen as Michigan's first U.S. representative to Congress. Because of the dispute, Congress refused to accept his credentials and seated him as a non-voting delegate, and the two U.S. senators chosen by the state legislature, who were Lucius Leon and John Norvell, were treated with even less respect, being allowed to sit only as spectators in the Senate gallery. At the time, new states were admitted only in pairs, at the urging pro-slavery Southern senators to preserve the balance between pro-slavery and free states in the Senate. And on June 15th, 1836, when Arkansas was, as a slave state, was admitted to the Union as the 25th state, as the first state in 15 years, Jackson signed a bill that allowed Michigan to become a free state, but only after it ceded the Toledo Strip in exchange for the concession. Michigan would be granted the western three-quarters of what is now known as the Upper Peninsula, because the easternmost portion had already been included in the state boundaries. Because of the perceived worthlessness of the Upper Peninsula's remote wilderness, which was ill-suited for agriculture, a September 1836 special convention in Ann Arbor rejected the offer. As the year wore on, Michigan found itself in a deep financial crisis, nearly bankrupt because of the high militia expenses. And the government was spurred to action by the realization that a $400,000 surplus, which in today's money is $12 million, in the U.S. Treasury was about to be distributed to the 25 states, but not to territorial governments. Michigan would have been eligible to receive a share. They needed to cede the Strip to end the war and become a state. The war unofficially ended on December 14th, 1836, and it's unofficially ended because technically it had never began to. And at a second convention in Ann Arbor, delegates passed a resolution to accept Congress's terms, and calling a convention was itself controversial, and it came about only because of an upswelling of private summonses, petitions, and public meetings. Since the legislature did not approve a call to convention, some said the convention was illegal. Whigs boycotted the convention as a consequence, and the resolution was ridiculed by many Michigan residents. Congress questioned the convention's legality, but accepted its results. Because of these factors, as well as a notable cold spell, the event became known as the Frostbitten Convention. On January 26, 1837, Michigan was admitted to the Union as a 26th state, without the Toledo Strip, but with the entire Upper Peninsula. The Toledo Strip became a permanent part of Ohio. The Upper Peninsula was considered a worthless wilderness, but by almost all familiar with the area, valuable only for timber and fur trapping. However, the discovery of copper in the Keweenaw Peninsula and iron in the central Upper Peninsula in the 1840s led to a mining boom that lasted long into the 20th century. Michigan's loss of 1,100 square miles of agricultural land in the Port of Toledo was offset by the gain of 9,000 square miles of timber and ore-rich land. But, although it seems, at first, it seemed the Upper Peninsula was worthless, and Michigan got it, thinking it was worthless, but it eventually became a timber and ore-rich land. And so it seems Michigan won that. Well, not exactly, because almost the entire city of Toledo itself has more people than all the Upper Peninsula, and with the whole strip, which is significantly smaller than the Upper Peninsula, it has a bit more people. And it did become an important port, and the Miami River became important a center for trade. And the differences of the opinion about the exact boundary location continued until a definitive resurvey was performed in 1915. The resurvey protocol ordinarily required the surveyors to follow the Harris Line exactly, but in this case, the surveyors deviated from it in places. This was done to prevent certain residents near the border from being subject to changes in state residence and landowners from having parcels in both states. And if you have looked at the state borders and where houses fall and parcels of land are, I think most every state should probably remark their line and maybe do that. And make sure no houses are half in one state, half in the other. And so, in 1915, the survey was delimited by 71 granite markers, 12 inches wide by 18 inches high. Upon completion, the two state governors at the time, Woodbridge and Ferris of Michigan and Franklin B. Willis of Ohio, shook hands at the border. Traces of the original ordnance line can still be found in northwestern Ohio today and northern Indiana. The northernmost boundaries of Ottawa and Wood counties follow it, as well as many township boundaries in Fulton and Williams counties. Many old north-south roads are offset as they cross the line, forcing traffic to jog east while traveling north. The line is identified on the United States Geological Survey topographical maps as the South Michigan Survey, and on Lucas County and Fulton County road maps as Old State Line Road, while the land border was firmly set in the early 20th century. The two states still disagreed on the path of the border to the east in Lake Erie in the 20th century. in 1973, they finally obtained a hearing before the U.S. Supreme Court on their competing claims to the Lake Erie waters. In Michigan versus Ohio, the court upheld a special master's report and ruled that the boundary between the two states and Lake Erie was angled to be to the northeast, as described in the Ohio state constitution, and not a straight east-west line. One consequence of the decision was that Turtle Island, just outside Maumee Bay, originally treated as wholly Michigan, was split between the two states. And I promise that is, or at least for now, the final and actual end of the surveying of lands and the disagreeing of where the borders actually fall. And it's crazy to think that this conflict started in the 1830s, and they didn't finish surveying the actual Harris Line till 1915, and the border of Ohio and Michigan wasn't completed until 1973. And there still remains a rivalry of Michigan and Ohio through what mainly Ohio State and the University of Michigan college football games. And I tell you what, if you know, I am from Ohio, and I support Ohio. Go Buckeyes. And if you see at the beginning of the video, and as you'll see at the end here, I am wearing an Ohio State shirt, but this is all complete history and not swayed to any other's side. Well, thanks for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe, and make sure to comment what you thought of the video, and if you have any other ideas. And sorry if I'm a little lacking, just it's been a long day of trying to nail this video down. And share this with a friend. If they don't listen, share with an enemy. And with that being said, Spriggs out.